Well, hello everyone, it's Ben Hardy here, and in today's going to be talking about how dealerships are struggling to sell brand new cars. But before we get into this video, as always, if you're going to save time and money the next time you purchase a car, link to my car buying guide in the description down below. And then if you want to see more videos just like this, then I recommend you subscribe because I post content every single day. Let's get into it. So over the last year, we have been seeing a market correction both with used cars and with brand new cars. Used cars, for example, have seen a huge decline with their wholesale values, and retail values have also slipped quite substantially as well. And then when it comes to new cars, although the prices have definitely not decreased as much as we'd like, there are discounts to be found on new cars where you could not find that just a year ago. I mean, in fact, it was actually the opposite, where in most cases, new cars were getting marked up over MSRP. And on top of that, availability with both new cars and used cars is really solid. Again, especially if you compare today to, today a year ago, right? So the situation is getting better and better for the consumer, but it looks like the market is somewhat overcorrecting when it comes to new cars, because availability with certain manufacturers is getting to the point where it seems like it's going to basically surpass pre-pandemic levels. And so that definitely creates an interesting car environment. Now, before we dive further into this video, something that I want to mention is that availability with new cars is only improving as time goes on. Like it seriously is like across the board at this point. Like brands that right now still have horrible availability are still having their availability increase, if that makes sense. Like a good example is Subaru. Just a year ago, if you wanted any Subaru model, you had to put in an order and you had to just wait. Whereas now, not only are you not having to wait because there are Subarus on the ground, but it seems like the amount of Subarus on the ground is increasing as time goes on. And even with models that are more popular, like, the new WRX, for example, the new Ascent just came out, and I mean, several of those have been on the ground, like available for customers to purchase. Outback, that's another one. The Outback is still pretty hot, but again, there are some vehicles available. But then there are certain vehicles within Subaru's lineup that are still kind of quote unquote untouchable in the sense of you have to wait quite some time. So like if you wanted a Wilderness package with Subaru, you're probably gonna have to wait. If you want a WRX with a manual transmission, you're probably gonna have to wait. Same thing with like a BRZ with a manual transmission. And so it's a case-by-case basis. And this extends to pretty much every single manufacturer, because the manufacturer that I hear talked about the most with availability is, well, a couple. So like Mazda's one, for example, where like if you want to basically get any package on a Mazda at this point, you can just go into a dealership and find it. Like pick your color, pick your package. But there are certain cars that are still kind of hard to find. Like if you want a Meridian Edition CX-50, like the Mazda dealership here locally only has one of them. Or if you want like a Mazda Miata with a manual transmission, those still aren't made in like huge numbers. And so availability is like better in the sense of you probably will be able to find one on the ground, but it's not like there's rows and rows of CX-50 Meridians, for example. And so even within the brands that have greater availability, they still have models that aren't necessarily the most available. And then same thing with like Dodge, Ram, Jeep, and Chrysler. This is another like set of brands that I always hear people talking about in terms of really good availability. But like if you wanted a Ram TRX, for example, 23, well, get in line and order one, because like they're all pretty much sold out right now. It's crazy. There are people that have orders in for 23 TRXs that have been waiting for months and months, and their truck isn't even like it's submitted to the factory, but the factory isn't even like starting to build their truck. But then if you look at like a regular Ram 1500, you can go into a dealership and you can find several rows of them most likely available. So again, case by case basis. Another one with Jeep, for example, is the Wrangler 392. Those are still hard to get, but if you want a regular Wrangler, well, pick your color. So what you need to know from this section in the video is just because there's greater availability with a brand doesn't mean that the specific vehicle within that brand that you're looking at is going to be super available, which means that you're not necessarily going to be able to have like the best negotiating power with that vehicle. Because like if a dealership, I'm just going to use this as like an example. Let's say that a dealership has like 20 Mazda CX-50s and they have one Meridian CX-50, and all the other CX-50s are just, other packages, right? that dealership probably be more willing to negotiate on a regular CX-50 rather than a Meridian, for example. Or if we go to the Dodge, Ram, Jeep, Chrysler stores, let's say that a dealership has a bunch of Wrangler 4xEs and then they happen to have a Wrangler 392 on their lot. They're probably going to be more willing to discount a 4xE than they are to discount the 392. And this is exactly what the new car market was like when I worked at a dealership during a normal car market where there was like 17 plus million new vehicles sold per year. If it was a quote unquote more run-of-the-mill, regular, mass-produced vehicle, then the chances of someone being able to get a discount on it were pretty high, especially if there was a lot on the lot. But then if it was a more specialty type performance, more expensive vehicle, whatever it may be, then the chances of getting discounts on it were pretty limited. Like I remember, right before I left, like Hellcats, for example, were still being sold at MSRP, and some people were even paying over MSRP for Hellcats. And this was just after a time period where there were big rebates on Hellcats, like over $7,000 off of MSRP. I remember because there was like a horsepower rebate, for example. And so the new car market, because of the current availability, but then the lack of availability of certain models, it's starting to look more normal to me. However, with the market looking more normal, this is what leads us into talking about how dealerships are struggling to sell cars. Now, when I say struggling to sell cars, this doesn't mean that they're not selling cars. They are still selling cars. There are always going to be customers that go in and buy no matter what the market's doing. It just depends on how many customers there are versus how many vehicles these dealers are accruing on their lots. And it seems like there's a big slowdown right now that's pushing the new car market to go into somewhat of an overcorrection. With some of the brands, they're not at pre-pandemic levels in terms of inventory, but it looks like they might get there if this trend continues where people just aren't buying new cars. And so I think that it's kind of like a chicken and egg type situation between customers and manufacturers, because manufacturers, again, are just coming out of the pandemic where they were struggling to build vehicles, and no matter how many vehicles they build, they would just be sold out typically. To now they're not only able to build vehicles and like catch up, but they're able to like fill up dealer inventories with these vehicles, and they aren't selling. And so the manufacturers are still not like fully in the mindset of we need to incentivize product to basically get it off of dealership lots like what they used to do prior to the pandemic. But the thing that I find funny is a lot of dealerships are starting to adopt this mentality early, because what I'm hearing from a lot of dealers is that they're just going in and they're just discounting the inventory. I'm hearing a lot of stories of dealers, posting their inventory for invoice as their online pricing, which again, that's what I saw prior to the pandemic, where dealerships would have a vehicle at a certain MSRP, and if they had several models available, they wouldn't post MSRP on that vehicle on their website. They would post invoice to attract customers to come in. And so it seems like dealers are kind of ahead of the curve when it comes to placing discounts on vehicles, and manufacturers are the ones that are lagging behind. And again, it looks like consumers are the ones that are waiting for manufacturers to react. And that's why I say chicken and egg, because it's like the manufacturers think that if they release the incentives too soon, then they think all the vehicles will sell out, and then they'll be back in the position they were in before where they can't keep up, which I don't necessarily think that's a bad position to be in. But they also see that as, if we release an incentive, it makes us less profitable. And so I understand the mentality, but if they don't act soon with the inventory increases that we've been seeing over the last 3 to 4 months at this point, it's going to put these brands in a situation where they're going to have to do bigger discounts than they would like to do to get rid of all of this excess inventory. I mean, there's a ton of leftover 22s on dealer lots, not as much as what you'd see prior to the pandemic, but there's still quite a bit. And then the 23s are just starting to absolutely stack up. And again, I'm seeing this like in real time with the cars that I'm reviewing, because it's like I go to dealer lots, and just a few months ago, it's like I would be lucky to find a few cars to film, whereas now, if I go to just one brand, I will have so many cars to film that I have to say no to filming certain cars because I just don't have enough time. So like anecdotally, it's a huge shift, that's for sure. And so with this weird availability situation, I see this potentially leading to an overcorrection in the new car market with certain models, not with every single model. There are certain models that are just never going to see incentives because there is just enough demand for those models. But these models that aren't selling, they're going to have to get some form of incentive to move them off of dealer lots. And this is where I see the quote unquote overcorrection potentially happening, because what's going to happen is they're just going to keep stacking up. They're not going to sell. And maybe the manufacturer is just going to kind of like ease into the incentives. They're going to be like, oh, here's $500, here's $700, here's $1,000, whatever it may be. And, you know, some customers will bite, but potentially it just won't be enough considering the interest rates that we currently have and everything else that's happening within the market. And so then the manufacturer and the dealership might get in a situation where they just freak out and they're like, I've had this car for too long. And the manufacturer's like, yep, you've had this car for too long. And maybe they just like blow it out. And that's where the overcorrection could potentially happen, where basically they just do a huge discount that's just so stupid, just like what I experienced when I worked at the Ram dealership when Ram released the new body style Ram 1500. Pretty, like, I think it was like a 6 months after it released, I can't remember the exact time frame, they released a rebate that was 15% off of MSRP, and then you could get dealer discount on top of that, and so you could get well over 20% off of MSRP on a brand new pickup truck. And so it led to this buying frenzy where, like, I remember at the dealership, like, we sold out of pretty much all of our trucks. Like, we had no brand new trucks at the end of the month, and that's something that we never experienced. It was like, it was kind of nerve-wracking for me as a salesperson, because I'm like, what am I going to sell next month? And so I potentially see something like this happening, where manufacturers just go like super deep into some sort of incentive on a vehicle that just makes absolutely no sense, and then, you know, a lot of people jump in and buy. It kind of creates a buying frenzy, which would obviously accomplish what they're trying to do, but that's kind of, you know, an overcorrection, because it's like, okay, you had to lower the prices way below what, you know, actual market value was on that new vehicle just to get people to buy. But then that kind of sets the mentality of, I'm only going to buy if that deal comes, and it's definitely a messy game. So it'll be interesting for me to see what happens in the coming months. Obviously, I'll continue to report to you guys with what I see, but all you really need to know at this point is that with certain models, availability is continuing to increase. However, with other models, availability is just still not there. So, I mean, kind of like the general rule is, if you just want a regular run-of-the-mill car, chances are you're going to be able to find one. You're going to be able to get a pretty good deal on one. But if you want something that is any bit desirable in the market because it's a newly released vehicle, or it's just some sort of fun enthusiast type car, yeah, good luck. That's all I got to say. Anyways, that's going to sum things up.